at the Sierra Green has been an archivist at the Heinz History Center's Dietrich Library and Archive since 2012, and she's been a steering committee member with the consortium since 2016. Sierra?
Thank you so much, Cindy. I really appreciate that.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone. I'm really honored to be here today. We History Center staff have had the honor of working with numerous community groups to preserve their histories on and off since our founding in 1879. As a founding member of the Western Pennsylvania Disability History and Action Consortium, we have had an unparalleled opportunity to learn about and preserve local disability history. And honestly, it's not an understatement to say that this partnership has resulted in the preservation and sharing of foundational stories in Western Pennsylvania disability history. In the museum world, we aspire to preserve and share history through people, as well as through the items that they created and collected throughout their lives. These items can be as small as a handheld recorder and as large as filing cabinets full of reports, memos, and telegrams. As a result of our partnership with the consortium, we have thousands of documents and photographs that shine a light on our topic of focus for today. And our goal at the History Center has been to work with the consortium to document this transformation from institutions back into community from multiple perspectives. So we started by preserving original records that illuminated measures taken by disability rights advocates such as Pat Clapp, Bob Nelkin, and Ginny Thornburg to expose human rights violations, abuse, and neglect at state institutions beginning in the 1970s. We have since also preserved records originating from service providers who now provide home and community-based services and were then boots on the ground assisting with the literal transition of institutionalized people back into the community. Finally, embracing the adage, nothing about us without us, we've had the honor of also preserving photographs, documents, and artifacts that reflect formally institutionalized individuals, as well as a pioneering individual who embraced newly created educational and community-based services in the 1970s and beyond. Perhaps most excitingly, however, we have seen these historic materials become activated. What do I mean by that? I mean that stories related to deinstitutionalization and then the transition to home and community-based services have been included in our exhibits, our publications, our social media presence, and of course, through events such as that where we are here today. In addition, teachers, students, filmmakers, and scholars have incorporated these stories into their work. And because many of these items are preserved at the History Center, these opportunities for activation and sharing of these stories are truly endless when we think about the future. So we are so honored to play a role in documenting local disability history, and we remain so eager to continue to work this work with the consortium. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Sierra. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate Heinz's help with the webinar today. First up on our agenda is the viewing of two short films that will set the stage for our keynote and our panel discussion. The first film is titled From Wrongs to Rights and was originally produced by Lisa Sonnenborn, Institute on Disabilities at Temple University for the United Way of Southwestern Pennsylvania, who has graciously given us permission to share their film. This short film details the advocacy effort to expose problems of overcrowding, understaffing, and seclusion in state-run and state-funded institutions, including Polk State School and Hospital in Venango County. And now here is From Wrongs to Rights.
Now is the time to transform the dark yesterdays of man's inhumanity to man into the bright tomorrows of justice and freedom. Now is the time.
In 1969, there was a lot of social unrest in the whole country. The issue was to see the ARC as a advocacy organization, not unlike the NAACP. I don't see people recognizing what Gene Isherwood and Pat Clapp and Barbara Sistick and those people went through to get good services in the community. There was a confrontation with a under-deputy secretary of something or other from the Department of Welfare, and he leaned across the table and said, "You're not playing fair." And Barbara's response was, "We're not playing at all."
We didn't have a social worker. We had great family and wonderful neighbors, but no official supports. The Children's Institute Peter was attending encouraged me to join the ARC, the Association for Retarded Citizens. In Allegheny County, we had a very strong chapter. And the minute I got involved with the ARC, that changed my life.
In 1972, I went to Western State School and Hospital. I saw people naked or almost naked, rocking back and forth, standing up or on the floor in fetal position, and wooden slat benches and very little furniture in the room. And then there's a glass window, and the staff are looking out through the window, monitoring the situation. And I thought, how could this be in early 1970s that we're essentially warehousing human beings and just ignoring every human need that they have? And I thought, if only people can see inhumanity, then they'll do something about it.
Bob was the one who first took me out into review and see what institutional care was like. There were two other moms I traveled with, Jean Isherwood and Barb Sistick. Bob Nelkin was the driver, and we would go to inspect, make unannounced visits to these centers. We would hear of abuses, we would hear of a lack of programming, and we were following up on that.
This group of moms were traveling all over the state. They were monitoring conditions at private facilities, in our public facilities, and I think it just got to a breaking point where these very, very courageous moms had said, "We've had it."
We were mother bears, and there was a confrontation we had with a superintendent who said, "Well, are you more interested in safety or are you more interested in program?" And one of us said, "That is an immoral question. The men and women and children who live here have a right to both safety and program."
I came to Pittsburgh in mid-1974, and having visited Polk many times, I was astonished the first time that I went onto a ward and saw just bed after bed after bed after bed, very little space in between, perhaps as many as 40 individuals living in a communal bedroom. Individuals would just come up to you, almost like beggars, wanting attention, wanting a hug. As a young professional, it was just shocking to me.
So on one visit to Polk 40 years ago, April 1973, we insisted upon seeing back ward, and we saw cages. We saw a human being in a cage, and the cage was about 6 feet tall, wooden slats on all sides and on top. The superintendent, Dr. McClellan, was with us, and we said, "This is a cage. Why do you have a cage?" He said, "I don't have enough money to have enough staff. I have lots of restraints that I have to use to protect the individuals and to protect others." So we asked him if there was any way he could not use it. he said, no, in fact, our medical staff helped design it. I think we knew that this was a pivotal moment.
We immediately called Helene Wolkemoth, who was the Secretary of Public Welfare, and she either the very next day or the day after came, saw the cages, and fired the superintendent.
And there's this great, iconic Post-Gazette, April 1973, above the fold, big headline, superintendent fired, staff to be retrained. And it's the staff to be retrained part which is really the exciting moment, because it wasn't just we're going to change the captain of the ship. It was, this is unacceptable, we need to find a better way. What happened next was pretty amazing.
My colleagues and mentors at the ARC had blown the roof off the place. They had done the work necessary to convince the Department of Public Welfare that those conditions were deplorable, unacceptable, and so the department, without litigation in this case, decided that they were going to rapidly move hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people back to their communities. Some younger families take it for granted that the supports that they receive were always there. And I work to help younger families appreciate that the family members who preceded them left really their blood on the street to work to create the community support system that we have.
It was very hard work. We learned from each other, we strengthened each other. We as parent advocates learned so much. Instead of just concentrating on our own son or daughter, we were able to see other people, and that was a very strong healing process. I see people advocating now in just as strenuous ways. They may not be looking at institutions with 6, 5, 4, 3,000 people in them, but you know, as a mother, as a parent, as an advocate, you never rest. You never rest.
Our next video is a brand new short film produced by the Consortium with funding from A.W. Mellon Foundation and with the assistance of the excellent filmmaking company Artifact Studios. This film is entitled Polk Center, 1897 to 2023, A Reflection. Polk Center, opened in 1897 in rural Venango County, closed its doors on May 1st, 2023. Once one of the largest institutions in the nation, Polk Center reached its peak population of more than 3,000 people in the 1950s and 1960s. The population decreased dramatically over the years. In May of this year, the care of the center's 27 remaining residents was handed over to Verland Community Living Arrangements based in Swickley. The company plans to utilize one building on the Polk campus to care for the residents until 4 group homes are constructed in the area. And now here is the debut of Polk Center, A Reflection.
Society's capacity to appreciate humanity's diversity is an ever-evolving process. Though we may not recognize it, our perspectives can be narrow, and it takes time to get the full picture. How we care for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities has evolved tremendously since Polk State School opened its doors in 1897. Polk was founded in Western Pennsylvania as what was then called an institution for the feeble-minded. The purpose of such institutions was to create a self-contained place where people with disabilities would live, work, and be cared for, separate from mainstream society. Isolated in a rural area, Polk was a community unto itself, where residents grew their own food, made their own clothes, and had their own activities. Like many institutions of its time, Polk's population became very large. Many residents came as children and spent their entire lives there. As more and more residents arrived over the first half of the 20th century, overcrowding led to people being warehoused and neglected. By 1955, Polk had more than 3,400 residents. It had become one of the most populous institutions in the nation and one of the most troubled. By the late 1960s, families and advocates across the nation began pushing for greater transparency and alternatives to the institutional system. In 1972, a small group of activists from a local chapter of the ARC of Pennsylvania exposed inhumane conditions at Polk, demanded immediate changes, and propelled the deinstitutionalization movement.
We would go to inspect, make unannounced visits to these centers.
I was astonished the first time that I went onto a ward and saw just bed after bed after bed after bed, very little space in between, perhaps as many as 40 individuals living in a communal bedroom.
We saw cages. We saw a human being in a cage, and the cage was about 6 feet tall, wooden slats on all sides and on top.
Advocates called for services in the community and laws that would safeguard the rights of people with disabilities. They called for special education, which would create a path to self-sufficiency rather than dependency. A landmark lawsuit led to the 1972 Park Consent Decree, which guaranteed the right to education in Pennsylvania and became a model for the nation. Society's thinking continued to evolve. More and more people with intellectual and developmental disabilities began to receive services at home and in their communities. The movement to end institutionalization prioritized individualized services, self-determination, choice, and the opportunity to flourish in the community. By the 1980s, Polk's population declined dramatically as people moved into communities. Even so, many residents remained at Polk. It continued to be the place they called home, a place they considered to be their community and even their family.
It was like a college campus. That's what it always reminded me of. Green, farmland, and it was beautiful.
But institutionalization and congregate care have inherent drawbacks. Regimentation, limits to freedom. The movement toward home and community-based services continued.
There was a very strong evolution. The population declined. The services that were available and the way they were managed changed.
With fewer and fewer people being sent to Polk, the number of residents dwindled by the 1990s from a few thousand to a few hundred. It became clear that the need for places like Polk no longer really existed. Pennsylvania has 2 remaining state institutions with a steadily declining census. Advocates continue to call for their closure. We now understand the vital importance of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to be able to live like everybody else, to have individualized support, to be empowered, to be able to advocate for oneself.
We were created to live in community. We weren't created to live in isolation, and that's been proven through so many different models, not just the institutional or workshop model in the field that we've been involved in, but I think, throughout society, we know how that fails.
Polk closed in 2023. Its closure is a powerful symbol, but this is not the end of the story. The system of support for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities continues to evolve. Many are in desperate need of services. A smooth road ahead is not guaranteed. Polk's legacy is a reminder that we must continue to evolve our understanding of humanity. Society thrives when it is diverse, when all have a chance to be included and participate. A society is just and fair when its citizens face their assumptions and prejudices about who belongs and who does not. Polk reflects a time when we thought that removing people with developmental and intellectual disabilities from society was the right thing to do. Now we know that it's just the opposite.
I'm sure these films inspire a lot of emotions and questions on your part as the audience, as they do for me. You will have a chance to ask questions after our keynote speaker and after the panel discussion. Next on our agenda, we are so pleased to have with us today Jill Jacobs, the Commissioner for the U.S. Administration on Disabilities for the Administration for Community Living, a program of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Ms. Jacobs was appointed to serve in this role in February 2022. She has more than 2 decades of professional experience managing disability services organizations, analyzing policy, and working toward improved health and disability programs and services at the local, state, and federal levels. She's also been an active grassroots organizer, leading campaigns to depict President Franklin D. Roosevelt seated in his wheelchair in the National Monument in Washington, D.C., and to ensure the inclusion of children with disabilities in schools, as well as organizing disaster response efforts for people with disabilities following Hurricanes Harvey and Maria, just to name a few of her accomplishments. In addition, Ms. Jacobs brings to the role the lived experience of her own disability and as the mother of 2 disabled adults. So after Ms. Jacobs' talk, we will have a Q&A session, and we'll be pulling questions from the Q&A feature, which you'll see in your Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. There should be a little Q&A button. So as Jill speaks, if you have questions, feel free to add them in the chat as you think of them. Jill, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you fine. Thank you so much.
Perfect. So I'll start with a visual description of myself for those of you who maybe can't see me right now. I am a white lady, middle-aged. I didn't do much with my hair today. It's pulled up in a bun. I'm wearing glasses, a gray sweater, and a fleur-de-lis necklace. I'm in my office. There's pink and yellow walls behind me, a lamp, and some artwork. So first I want to thank you all for inviting me here today. I'm really happy and honored to be here. You know, in the position I'm in right now, I just have amazing opportunities to talk to people. You know, real people, about our history, about the disability community, about who we are, where do we come from, where do we think we want to go, what's the future possibly look like, and how are we gonna get there. So those videos were fantastic, very interesting, heartfelt. If I look a little whatever, I don't know. It's because I got a little teary with the first one, especially because I felt like I was kind of given a little tap in my memory gut, I guess, emotionally, because I saw Ginny Thornburg on there. And I worked with her way back so many years ago when I was doing the FDR and wheelchair stuff at the National Organization on Disability, and Ginny was there getting her programs off the ground around inclusivity in religious environments. And so we worked together then, and I was really pleased to see her face, and I loved hearing what Jenny had to say about the work they did around changing institutions, changing the way things were in Pennsylvania. I also work with every day with a wonderful person called Nancy Thaler, and you all might know her there in Pennsylvania. She's worked very hard throughout her lifetime, and so I'm sure that Ginny knows her, and many of you know of her. She's worked very hard on making change for people with disabilities, in particular people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And she and I continue to work on that now today at the Administration for Community Living. So I want to talk today a little bit about where we come from, where we are, where we hope to go, and how the organization that I'm with, the Administration for Community Living and the Administration on Disabilities, how we support change through our vast networks of programs and services. So a little bit about the Administration for Community Living. If you don't know what we do, we're under Health and Human Services in the federal government. And some of the programs at ACL are the Administration on Aging, the Center for Innovation and Policy, NIDLR, which is, I can't even remember all the words that the acronym stands for, but it's the National Institute on Disability, I don't know, research. They're our research arm, okay? And then the Administration on Disabilities, where I'm the commissioner. So at the Administration on Disabilities, we focus on particular segment of work. So we have the Office of Independent Living Services, and OILP oversees all the centers for independent living across the country and all the state organizations that support those centers, the state independent living councils. We've got about, I honestly don't know how many, I think maybe 500 centers for independent living across the country, a lot. So that's one thing we do. And you may be familiar with the independent living movement because Judy Heumann is considered the mother of the independent living movement. We also oversee at the Administration on Disabilities, developmental disability councils. So these are councils that are created by every governor in every state, every territory. There's a council, a DD council, and it's required that the people on the DD councils are at least majority of the council is people with developmental disabilities. And the governor answers to this council. They communicate regularly, and then we oversee and support them. We have protection and advocacy under us. Protection and advocacy, well, we have, I don't know, maybe 67 or 70 protection and advocacies across the country, at least one in every state and territory. Some have more. And that's a place where people with disabilities can go for free legal support. Call their protection advocacy in their state and say, I have a problem, I need help. There's a problem, a systemic problem in my state. We feel like this is happening, we need help. Our school district, there's a systemic problem, they're doing this or they're doing that instead of what they're supposed to do. You can call your protection advocacy system about that. Protection advocacy systems were very helpful during COVID. I reached out to my PNA before I had this role and said, what the heck is going on? How come people with disabilities and their caregivers aren't at the front of the line? Do they not realize that caregivers for people with disabilities are frontline workers? And the PNA helped us to make sure that in Virginia, we got to the front of the line. Our caregivers got to the front of the line, that we were recognized, that we got, the protective equipment that we needed. We got our vaccines. We were recognized and valued. They helped us advocate for changes in home and community-based services to make sure that people whose caregivers had to quit, still had some kind of care. Their family members could care for them and get reimbursed for doing that care. So that's some of the things that the PNA does, some of the things the PNA does around advocacy, legal support, and some ways they've helped us recently. We also have the UCEDS, that is UCEDDS. And that stands for University Centers for Excellence in Developmental Disability Services. There are about 70 of those too, and they are in every state and territory, at every university. Not every university, but at least one university in every state and territory has a USED in it. And they do all sorts of disability work. They're all unique. They're all different. For example, we have one in Arizona that has many focuses, but one particular focus they have is around tribal services. We have a USED in Minnesota that works very hard on home and community-based services. I hope they'll forgive me that I don't remember their exact name. Center for Integration, Community Integration. I'm bad at names. And you all have one in Pennsylvania too. So those are some of the services that we have. We also have something, and those are ongoing services. They exist. They are mandated to exist through, federal laws, federal acts, and they get ongoing funding every year, and they'll continue to. Then we have something called Projects of National Significance, or PNS. So PNS is what we call discretionary funds. And those funds, every year we get to decide, we've got this pile of money, what are we going to do with this money? And so we really look at what's trending in disability. Where are the areas that we need to change? Or what's trending in a positive way? And we need to put some funds toward building that up even more, really escalating it. So that's every year we do that. And then outside of those programs, those funding streams that we have we've really worked hard on this in the past few years, for sure. I have to say that, to build partnerships. So we have partnerships. We've really focused in the past few years on a number of partnerships. I'll highlight a few. We've really worked hard on our partnership with the Department of Education, with what's called OSERS, Office of Special Ed and Rehabilitative Services. And then under that, it's called RSA, Rehab Services Administration. Not that you all need all the detail, but so you get an idea. And with them, we've worked specifically around students with disabilities, young people with disabilities, transition, helping students with disabilities and their families understand what it's going to look like to transition from school to adult life, and how that can be improved, supported, how we can help young people with disabilities learn to advocate for themselves as individuals, in small groups with their friends, locally, around policy at the state level, federal level. How can they do that? So we've partnered with Department of Ed in particular last year. I'm really working hard to put out funding. I think it was a lot. I want to say it was $200 million or something like that worth of funding, to get funds to states, and it makes sure we included our Centers for Independent Living in that funding, so that they can work on these transition issues with students. We've partnered with FEMA a lot in the last year and a half around disaster relief and climate change. How can we make sure that we get services to people with disabilities before disasters, during disasters, and after disasters? And how can we make sure our voice is heard around climate change, how climate change affects people with disabilities? That's been a great partnership, and we are looking forward to more good things to come as we move forward. And I think a big partnership for us in the past year and a half or so, past 2 years, huge partnership, has been with CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. The space that we've worked with CMS on a lot of things, but the space where we've really focused is home and community-based services. So when we talk about home and community-based services, many of us think of HCBS. Many of us think of HCBS as our waiver. I have a Medicaid waiver. That Medicaid waiver helps me to live in the community and not live in an institution. So the services that you saw in the video, people were getting whatever they got in institutions. That home and community-based services ensures that those can be provided instead in the community. And what we've really worked with CMS on in the last year is called the settings rule. So the settings rule came about a while ago, like a dozen years ago. And it's taken a while to really institute it. A lot of push, a lot of work, a lot of organizing, a lot of strategizing, a lot of incremental policy change and programmatic change at the state level to identify how is this going to work here. The heart and soul of the settings rule is really about human rights, civil rights, basic rights. Because what we've found is that, well, home and community-based services, living in the community is awesome and great, and it's what we all want. It can still be isolating. It can still, home and community-based services can still be set up in a way where providers kind of run things and people with disabilities don't really have choices and options. It can be set up in a way where rules are made for people with disabilities and in a way that isn't person-centered. So what the settings rule does is it changes that, and it requires that services are provided in a way that is person-centered. It focuses, it centers the person with a disability. What's important to me as a disabled person? What do I want in my life? How am I going to get there? How are the services that are available to me going to help me get there? What matters to me? What matters for me? What's my life going to look like right now and in the future? What is that about? It's about me. And so that's what the setting rule is about. And the setting rule does that with the leverage and in the context of civil rights, human rights. So the settings rule insists on several things. And some of the key things are really basic that you might not think that we would have to actually say on paper, that we would have to actually say, this is a rule, this, but it turns out we do. And so we've said it and we're enforcing it. So some of those rules are things as basic as, if I'm hungry, I should have access to food. If I'm thirsty, I should have access to drink. I have the right to see my family and my friends. And I have the right not to see my family and friends if I don't want to. I have the right to have relationships, friendships, to try things just like anybody else. I have the right to try dating someone and see if that works. And if it doesn't, to end it. I have the right to express myself, my identity, if I'm gay or straight or male or female, and enter into relationships as I choose. I have the right to have sex. I have the right to have friends come to my house and visit with me. Real basic things. I have the right to live where I want to live. And when I live there, the right to live there in the way that I choose to live there. As long as I'm following the law, I should be able to do these things. And so that's kind of the basics of what the HCBS settings rule is about. And so at ACL, in the past few years, we have worked extremely hard partnering with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services to make sure that rule is being followed in states. And so in the past year, I've traveled myself to, I've literally lost count of how many states I've gone to with CMS. We've gone out and we've looked at states, we've looked at providers, and we've said, what's really happening here? Are you really implementing this rule? State. Are you making sure your providers are really implementing this rule? State. And then we've let people know, let the states know in written reports what we found, what needs to be better, what needs to change, what's working awesome, and we want more of. What's working is so let's work on it, but it's a great idea. We've let states know. And we've done that in a way that's public, which has not happened in the past. We've made sure that all of these reports are public. You can go online and you can find them and see what happened in my state, what happened in Arizona or Texas or Alabama, wherever. So I think we visited 17 or 18 states. We're going to continue doing that work, and the work is evolving as we learn. So it's not a static process. It's an iterative process. It's an evolving process. Every so often we say, okay, we finished this group of states. Let's take a look and see what are we learning and how are we going to adjust our process as we move forward. So it has been a great opportunity to learn and to make change. And one of the key elements of that has been advocates, people with disabilities. And I'm hoping there's a lot of advocates in this room today. People with disabilities and people who love and care about them and for them. So what we've done at ACL is we have reached out to our networks that I just talked about and said, who's an advocate in your state? We know you all are advocates. We want you to help us identify more advocates. Who are the real trusted folks? You know, who's that mom who everyone knows is going to be like, you know, she's going to know, she's wise, she's been doing this a long time, throwing punches for a long time, making policy change, insisting on change for a long time. Who's that expert in your state? Who's the person with a disability who is admired and revered and who really knows how to get a message across? Who are your trusted spokespeople? And then we come together with our networks and trusted spokespeople, and they all speak to CMS, which is unprecedented. It's never been done before. And they directly tell CMS, here's what's working, here's where there's a problem, here's the rocks we need you to look under, here's the red flags. So that when we go out to the states, we're armed, we're prepared. We have a real knowledge base about what people say, not what program leaders say, not what providers say. We hear that stuff too, sure, but we hear from the people, and we help bring that information to CMS, who really needs to hear from the people and have never before heard from the people. So that's something we've worked really hard on and we're really proud of at ACL. We've seen remarkable results with that. We've seen just a fresh, new, heartfelt, warm response from CMS, and how, you know, I think CMS has always understood, but they're able to display now and express now and participate now in a different way in making sure these rights are happening for people with disabilities through this rule. So it's been wonderful. It's been a great opportunity, and you all are focused on history, and so are we. We love our history. We believe in our history. We honor and admire people like Judy Heumann and Ginny Thornburg and my beloved Nancy Thaler. And we believe on making history. So a little bit about me personally. I know I've been talking a minute, but I'll tell you that personally, I have a disability. I grew up with a dad who had a disability, and my children have disabilities. 2 of my children have developmental disabilities. And I feel like this has kind of been my whole life experience, disability stuff. I didn't ever know anything different. I feel really lucky that my dad had a disability, because when I had my kids, I had so much knowledge and experience about what that is, what that means, how it impacts a human being and who they are as a person. And I'm lucky, because I never ever from the time I had my kids thought there's something wrong with them. I just felt like this is who they are, and this is what I'm going to do to make sure they are able to be that person as best as they can be throughout their lives. They're 30 now. They, you know, have their own levels of independence. It's, you know, no 2 people with disabilities are the same, and neither are they. I'm proud of them. I'm impressed with them, and I love them. I'm very dedicated to home and community-based services, and it's a big reason of why I choose to be here in this position, and I choose to stay in this position. So I'll tell you a story, personal story. every time I say this, I don't say it every time I speak, but I'll say it here because we're talking about institutions and it's the right context to do so. On my dad's side of the family, every man in our lineage has lived and died in an institution. My grandfather, my great-grandfather, and my great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather all lived and died in a place called Eastern State in East Feliciana Parish, Louisiana. But my dad didn't, even though he had a disability too. He certainly was in and out of nursing homes. It was a challenge. But he died at home because he had home and community-based services. And he lived a great majority of his life at home. My children have never been in a nursing home or an institution, thankfully. And I hope they never will be. I hope none of our communities, our disability communities, children never will be. I hope none of us will have to be. And I respect and honor our legacy and our history. I respect and honor this moment I've been gifted as to be in this position. I respect and honor every single one of you for the fights that you have every day and the work that you do every day. And I thank you for letting me be here today and speak with you. Thank you. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Jill, thank you for that. I'm tearing up now too. Thank you for sharing that personal story. That was very touching. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A. I am going to take I'm not going to go in order. The first one, which I think is something that we may have to share after the fact in the post-event follow-up email. Jan asks, can the link or website be shared that has the public reports for the settings rule?
Yes, I can get that for you and share it. I can
Okay.
send it to you, Cindy, so you can share it with everyone. Would that be okay?
That would be just fine.
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. I really appreciate you asking so that we can make sure everyone has that information.
That's great. Thank you. Okay, Lucinda asks, can you explain why ODP was unable to use 170 million COVID era dollars and why it was taken away in this year's budget? Where did those dollars go that were unused?
I need you to interpret that acronym for me, please.
Office of Developmental Programs, I believe.
So that's a state office.
It's a state office.
I can't tell you that answer.
And one of the panelists I see is actually typing in an answer. So somebody's answering that. Deputy Secretary Ahrens, it says, is typing in an answer. So there we go. And I'll read that answer for everyone once it's finished. The next question, also from Lucinda, says, personal centered is great, but the regulations in residential independent living are out of date with this and out of date with a focus on, and this is capitalized, everyday lives. How is this being addressed?
So I'm going to reflect back to you what the question is so I understand what you're asking, if that's okay. So what I think you're asking is, how are group homes made to respond in the way that the HCBS settings rule says? Is that in a person-centered way? Is that correct?
That I suppose that interpretation makes sense.
Okay.
I have
If
no
the
way
person
to.
who asked it is still here and wants to correct me or add some information as I respond, please feel free to. I won't be offended at all if I'm on the wrong track. So I agree that there are many group homes or settings like that. So it could also include places where people with disabilities work in a group or on their own. It could also include day programs where people go during the day. Maybe their perspective is out of step. I hear you. I don't disagree with you. And I would also say that when we started moving people from institutions to community, it was a first step. And so group homes were the first, that's what our community came up with in our historically, right? We came up with, get them out of group homes, let them out of institutions, let's find something else. And they're wonderful in lots of ways. And yes, a lot of the practices that were started way back when haven't really evolved that much. And so through this settings rule, we set these rules, and that's the way that we can make change. So if in your state you're familiar with group homes that don't follow the settings rule, we would love to know that. We would love to hear about that. In fact, being in Pennsylvania, we are gathering names of advocates now who would like to let CMS know how they feel. So if you can get your contact information, if you're interested in that, you can get your contact information perhaps to Cindy. She can send me a list of people who'd like to be part of an advocacy group to let CMS know what you feel is happening in your state so that we can address that. I will tell you what we found. I told you we've evolved, right? We were doing things one way, but as we learned some things, we evolved to and start doing it another way. So this next group of states we're going to, our focus is much more on what we found over the last 17 or 18 states. And what we found primarily is case management isn't that great. We need to work on it. Every state needs to work on their case management. And that includes creating person-centered plans, monitoring person-centered plans, training to understand what that even means and how can we accomplish it, tools to help accomplish it, maybe communities, groups that help those things happen. Person-centeredness is a problem. Case management is a problem. Service delivery can be a problem in terms of, having enough providers, understanding what providers are out there. Maybe there's just a list of providers, but not really they're not accepting anyone. So these are some of the things that we're going to be working on as we move forward, meeting with states and saying, what can we do here? What's happening in your state? Show us what's happening in your state. So we need from advocates to tell us what problems they're encountering. So if you feel, I don't know who asked the question, if you feel that, group homes in your state are problematic and they aren't really reflecting the HCBS settings rule, we would like to hear about it. Let Cindy know. And Cindy, if you could pass on names of people who would like to get their voices heard, I would love that.
Okay. And so there was a little follow-up commentary. I'm going to move on to the next question, but same questioner expanded to say that certain regulations do not allow for personal choice. If my son wants to have me work for him, which I currently do, I am not allowed to under present regulations. And Deputy Secretary Ahrens is also typing an answer to that question in the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and let her answer that. Going back to the first question that Deputy Secretary answered about ODP not being able to use 170 million COVID era dollars, the answer to that, so everybody can hear it, Deputy Secretary Ahrens said there were no unspent COVID funds. The General Assembly passed a budget that included 170 million less than the governor requested for ODP. The funds were not used due to underutilization. Many ODP providers are still struggling to recover from the pandemic. This is mostly due to workforce shortages. So that was the answer to that question. The next question we have, this is from John. He says, can you talk a little more about relationship with Pennsylvania. John, if you could expand on what relationship, do you mean Ms. Jacobs' relationship with Pennsylvania, her department's, your department's relationship with Pennsylvania is most likely, I think, what he's saying.
So our relationship with Pennsylvania is the same relationship we have with any state or territory. We oversee programs in those states, the ones I mentioned: independent living, DD councils, protection and advocacy, USAIDs, projects of national significance, in all of those, in every state and territory. And through our partnerships, we engage individuals in that state around advocacy, around change making, around all sorts of things. And we support the state of Pennsylvania in being successful the best that they can be. We don't see states as our adversaries. We see them as our partners. We want to work together. I appreciate Deputy Secretary Aaron's presence here today. We see, states as we want to build partnerships and build relationships, and we want to facilitate partnerships and relationships between advocates, people with disabilities, their family members, and the state organizations. We're about building bridges. So we build a bridge to you, people in Pennsylvania. We hope you'll walk across and meet us in the middle.
Thank you. And the next question is from Rose. How is the work you're doing with CMS making sure you're getting input from those who advocate for profoundly autistic individuals who are often excluded from community programs due to behaviors that require high staff ratios and more specialized supports?
I really appreciate this question. And I appreciate you. Who asked this question, do you know?
Her name is Rose.
Rose. I appreciate that you asked this question. Are you a person who has autism? If you're comfortable sharing that.
Jill, I'll just share that participants in this can't come off mic. So Rose could maybe share in the chat, but she won't be able to speak with you directly.
Okay. So Rose, I appreciate you asking that question. For whatever reason you chose to ask, it's a good one, it's a valid one, and I think everyone needs to hear this distinction. There are people who struggle to participate in community in the ways that maybe you and I see community, right? What I consider my community may not be the way that Cindy sees community for her, right? So I was a military spouse for a long time. I still consider the Army my community. I'm a member of the disability community. I consider that my community. I live in Northern Virginia, and I've got a little neighborhood I live in here. That's my community. My family's my community. For other people, community might mean sports or schools or my book club. It might mean my family and my support workers. What community is to me is not the same as what community might be to you. And so we rely on the person-centered plan. And we want to make sure people understand how to create person-centered plans, how to work with people with disabilities and their family members to make sure that person-centered plan reflects what that person wants and needs, desires, believes in, and what they see as their community. So if we can do that, if we can get better and better at that, it doesn't matter what you see as your community, my friend. It matters that we are getting you what you need in the community you see as yours.
And Rose had a follow-up. Her son is a person with autism. So
thank you, Rose. I appreciate you asking.
Okay, our next question. We've got time for some time for a few more. This is from Jan. With the reality of direct care staffing crisis, what consideration is being given to further engage community members and supporting families in engaging supports outside of our systems?
Thank you for asking that question. Man, everyone's on point today. Pow, pow, pow. I love it. So we have at ACL, we have a project. I guess we're going to call it a project. We are creating what we're calling a national center for direct care workforce. So we're very focused on trying to figure out how to fix this caregiver crisis that we're in. It is extremely hard to find staff. It's extremely hard for agencies to find staff, for day programs to find staff, for people with disabilities who use consumer direction to find staff. It's a problem. We know it's a problem. So we're creating this national center to explore that and to find ways to fix this problem. Not going to say that we're like, we know the solution. We're working on it. So in working on that, we put together a steering committee that includes people with disabilities who use these programs, their family members who work through these programs. That includes organizations, associations that support the states in running HCBS programs. It includes provider associations, experts, subject matter experts from universities and who've done a lot of study and research. And again, we consider people with disabilities and their family members to be subject matter experts. So we have those individuals on this steering committee too. And we all are working together along with multiple expert organizations across the country to try to solve this problem. That's something we're doing right now. We are also partnering with our federal partners, the Department of Labor, other, CMS, other HHS entities. We're partnering every way we can to fix this problem. We always want your input. We always want to hear from you. We know that it's a problem. We're working on it, my friends.
Thank you. And another question. This is the last question in the chat. If anybody has any final questions, not in the chat, but in the Q&A feature, if you have any other questions, we can take one or two more. So please put them in the Q&A if you have anything else. The question I'm looking at is from John, and he asked, could you talk a little bit about your department's relationship with aging and disability resource centers?
I sure can. So the project I just mentioned, well, I don't know if y'all have ever heard of silos. People talk about silos all the time. So, the disability and the aging community has historically been a little separated, right? But the Administration on Aging, which oversees the Aging and Resource Centers, is part of ACL, the Administration for Community Living, and so are we, Administration on Disability. So we're all together under one roof. And we are working really hard on partnering with AOA. One of the big things we're partnering on is the Administration on Aging is our partner in this caregiver project we're working on, the caregiver crisis. So that project is run by the National Council on Aging, and there are multiple partners that are disability partners. And so people on the committee have worked together to solve these problems in a way that includes people with disabilities and includes people who are aging. And so what I like to say is you can age with a disability, you can age into a disability, but either way, you're going to get to disability. So we are, again, building a bridge between disability and aging in this way. We also have, so the Administration on Aging has, and I can make sure that Cindy gets a link to this also, has a National Family Caregiver Strategy, and that's through our RAISE program. And so I would love to, the national strategy, we presented to Congress, was it this year? Was it the end of last year? We presented that to Congress, and it was open for public comment for a while. We would love for all of you to take a look at that and see what you think about it. There's a real focus on family caregivers and what's happening if you're a family caregiver, whether you're caring for someone who's aging or someone who's younger. We focus on that. So I will make sure you get a link to that. I'll get a link to Cindy so you can learn more about that. And we're doing lots of programs with aging. I'll give you one more I'll tell you about. And that is, we have something called the Bridging Aging and Disability Project. that is goes through our developmental disability councils. And so in different states, so different states are doing different things around that. But they're working on issues like guardianship and conservatorship, and how to make sure that people have choice around that. They get supported decision making. We're working on things like Social Security in one state. We're many different issues that those projects, Bridging Aging and Disability projects, are working on. I see your lips moving, Cindy, but you're on mute.
Yes, I am. I cleared my throat and didn't want everybody to hear that. Are you up for 2 more questions?
Of course, if you all don't mind the fact that my that there's people who've decided to work on the yard today while I'm on this, then if you don't mind that background noise, of course I'm up for more questions.
Can't hear it, so that's good. So this is kind of related. The word silo comes up in this. This is anonymous. Oftentimes in the disability community, we tend to silo, and there is a feeling that supporting another group takes away from your group. How does ACL promote that all disability groups can support each other without losing out for their own?
My goodness, crabs in a barrel, you know? I'm a big fan of coalition building. At ACL, we believe in coalition building. We believe in building bridges and crossing them. We get that people feel that way. I believe that that comes from the traditional funding streams. So funds for people with developmental disabilities were funded by the DD Act, okay? The Rehab Act funds things for people who use independent living programs, who maybe have more physical disabilities. Funds for people who are aging come through the Older Americans Act. Because those funding streams exist, this is my belief, maybe other people would disagree, we've gotten into this mode of this is the way we do things. And if I want to share with this other person, I have to give up some of mine, right? If I want this other person to share with me, they got to give up some of theirs. It's an unfortunate perspective. We work very hard to foster collaboration, to participate and model collaboration, and to ask that collaboration exists elsewhere. I would like to comment too around equity. We work really hard to foster equitable collaboration. It's important that we remember that not everyone is the same as me. People come from all kinds of walks of life, have all kinds of experience, look all kinds of ways, believe all kinds of things. And one great thing about disability, and there are many great things about having a disability, but one great thing about our community, people with disabilities, is we exist everywhere. Everywhere, in all the communities, in all the sections. And I hope that we will work together more in that way. And we foster that and we model that at ACL. And we expect, and so does the president expect, he issued an equity executive order. The Secretary of Health expects, ACL expects that we provide all of the services and we work together in a way that is equitable.
So we have time for one more quick question, and then we are going to move on to the panel discussion. Another question that's not really much of a Q&A type of thing. Anonymous attendee wonders if contact information for you will be made available. Is that
my email address? Is jill.jacobs@acl.hhs.gov, and I will put it. Can I type in the chat? Will people see it if I put it in the chat?
As long as everyone is selected, yes, and I can also include that in the follow-up.
Okay, if you could, well. Yeah, I'm happy for everyone to get my email address. I want to tell you the truth. I'm always happy for people to get my email address. I get a lot of email, so it's hard to respond to everyone. So you might email me and I'll send you a short email back and loop in someone who can really directly point you where you need to go. I'm happy to talk to you.
Thank you for that. So this is the final question we're going to take for this section. This is from Lee, and they ask, you mentioned that provider agencies are included on the steering committee. Does this include direct support professionals, or are they leadership of these agencies?
It includes direct support professionals. Absolutely. We need to know the perspective of the actual people. Now, the center itself, at this time, as we evolve, we definitely have an expectation things will change. But the center itself isn't intended at this moment for direct support professionals to be able to reach directly and say, I need help with this. What can I do? It's intended to help states improve, and then through your states or territories, that then you can get support in that way, right? So direct support professionals can reach out through whatever we're creating, and so can people with disabilities. Even with that, though, as I said, the perspective of people with disabilities and their family members, and I'm so sorry I didn't mention that initially, and I'm glad you asked the question for clarity, and the support of direct support professionals.
Great, that's all the time we have for today. Commissioner Jacobs, thank you so much for talking and being here and patiently answering so many questions.
Of course.
We're grateful to you and for the work that you're doing. And we look forward to seeing the future progress that comes out of your department. So thank you.
Thank you. And I am truly grateful for all of you and the work you're doing. And you are the future. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So next up, we have our esteemed panel of disability experts, which will be moderated by Pittsburgh's own Chaz Kellum. I almost feel like Chaz needs no introduction, but I'll do it anyway. Our moderator for the panel discussion, Chaz Kellum, currently serves as a program manager at Highmark Health, where he does work in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Chaz began his career at the Pittsburgh Pirates, where he spent 10 seasons, most of which in the Community and Public Affairs Department as the manager of diversity initiatives. And we've got 3 panelists today. Our panelists are Deputy Secretary Kristen Ahrens from the Pennsylvania's Office of Developmental Programs, ODP, within the Department of Human Services. Prior to her appointment as Deputy Secretary in 2018, Ms. Ahrens served as the Director of the Bureau of Policy and Quality Management at ODP. Before joining ODP in 2016, Ms. Ahrens was the Policy Director for the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, Pennsylvania's federally funded university center for excellence in developmental disabilities. Ms. Ahrens' 30 years of experience working with people with developmental disabilities spans from advocacy and community education to providing supported living, family support, and self-directed services, and includes development and management of several self-directed models. We also have Hope Dittmeyer, the Executive Director for Mattingly Edge. Ms. Dittmeyer holds a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from the University of Kentucky. She is also a social role valorization, SRV, practitioner. SRV training provides empirical knowledge on how to increase the chances people with disabilities will experience the good things in life many people take for granted. She has also learned a great deal from her sister-in-law in terms of the perspective of a person with a disability. Our third panelist is Christopher Liuzzo, a consultant based in New York State who is doing work grounded in values informed by social role valorization and person-centered practices. He has held numerous advocacy and administrative leadership roles since the mid-1970s. His work includes the co-founding of advocacy organizations dedicated to individualized supports. He retired from his role as Associate Executive Director of the ARC of Rensselaer County, New York, where he led initiatives to downsize and close congregate living settings. He's now a consultant to organizations especially interested in moving from congregate services to individualized supports. I'm now going to pass the podium to Chaz. Welcome, everybody, and let the discussion begin.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Cindy. As mentioned, my name is Chaz Kellum. I use the he, him, his series of pronouns, and I'm honored to serve as today's moderator of this phenomenal panel. Very much looking forward to it. Quick visual description: African American male, glasses, wearing a yellowish goldish shirt, short hair, and joining you today from the Fifth Avenue Place, the Highmark Health headquarters. Very excited to jump right into our questions this morning. So our first question, we know that the 50-year trajectory from the institutional model to today's home and community-based models provides a sense of security and insurance to people with disabilities and families. Even with today's threats of staff shortages, limited pool of staff for the future, and efforts towards segregation and congregation. What provides you with the hope for the future? Again, what provides you hope for the future? And I'm going to ask Deputy Secretary to start us off with the response to that question.
Yes, and good morning, everyone. Really glad to be here. Love seeing the video presentations and hearing Commissioner Jacobs start us out. So before I talk about hope, I do want to be really clear that I have real concerns about threats to some of the progress that we have made. I think workforce shortages are one, and I want to be very specific about what some of those are. I think it is beyond just direct support professionals. This goes to Rose's question and comment earlier. I think one of the real challenges that we have in terms of ensuring that home and community-based services are available to everyone is the clinical capacity within our home and community-based service system. And, you know, when I look at the numbers coming out of the Centers for Disease Control related to autism and autism prevalence in 8-year-olds right now, it's 1 in 36 8-year-olds in this country have autism, and a quarter of those are on the more severe end of the spectrum. And those young people will be adults, and many of them will be looking to us to provide services. And so we've really got to be thinking about how our home and community-based services can deliver therapeutic, restorative environments, structured environments for adults with autism and with dual diagnosis, which is another area that our system is significantly challenged with. So one of the other things I'll say, because I took a look at the attendee list and I can see we have a lot of advocates on here. The other thing I think is a threat is that we do have some waning advocacy. The voices that, you know, got us here today in terms of having less than 5% of people living in institutional settings, I feel like to some degree people are a little bit resting on our laurels and we think this is a done deal and, you know, we're good. I don't think we can take our foot off the pedal, particularly when it comes to making sure that the kind of support that people need to live in those home and community-based settings is available. So with that, now we'll talk about hope. Sorry for the downer portion of that, but I do want to be real about where I think some of the specific threats are there. But in terms of hope, hope is that we've been on this trajectory in Pennsylvania. We are down now for IDD services. Less than 5% of people are living in institutional settings. Even in the midst of the pandemic, we closed 2 of the 4 state-operated facilities. Right now, again, in the midst of this workforce crisis and all of the challenges with the pandemic recovery, we're closing another institutional setting. We are in the process of closing Woodhaven, which is a privately operated facility in southeastern Pennsylvania, but we are actively working on that, and that should be closed within the next 12 to 18 months. Another thing that gives me hope is we've built some really great infrastructure. We have some very, very solid infrastructure to support home and community-based services. In particular, in Pennsylvania, I think we have done a very good job of building up peer support models, our network of family advisors, adopting a life course to really think about people over the course of a lifespan. pieces are very much embedded in our system at this point. And it gives me a lot of hope that that will continue in spite of all of those threats, that we've got something solid that will continue. And then the last thing I would say is that as part of the infrastructure, there's been a lot of provider transformation that has happened. We have providers that have closed any facility-based services and are supporting people. They've really focused on employment. Our employment numbers are up tremendously from where they had been previously. Youth coming out of high school are now employed at a much higher rate than they used to be. We have providers who have really been looking to move away from residential services and more towards supported living models. All of those things give me tremendous hope, and I think we've seen we've got some very good data to support that those trends are occurring. So that's I think lots of reason for hope there.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that thoughtful response. Hope is so important to continue to talk about and express. So thank you for that response. And I do want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the folks that are attendees to this morning. We do have a great pool of advocates, of organization representatives. So I wanted to take a moment to thank and acknowledge all of you as attendees for joining for this very important conversation. So I'm going to go to Christopher. Christopher, same question. What provides you with hope for the future?
Well, hello, everybody. Chris Liuzzo from New York. I've had the great privilege of spending a fair amount of time in Western Pennsylvania, both on a social level and on a professional level. Shout out Dorothy Gordon. I see you're out there somewhere, so hi to you. I'm going to, in some sense, echo the Deputy Secretary's concerns about threats. They're different than hers, but sort of the downers thing that you did. On a positive note, the first video started with Dr. King. And if there's anything that gives me hope, and there aren't many things, is his famous quote, which I can only paraphrase, but it's that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And our field is bending ever so slightly over the last 40, 50 years toward justice. Our good friend, I know a good colleague and friend and mentor of Hope Dittmeyer is one of mine too, John O'Brien. Some of you will know John. He was once asked, what's our work? And John, ever thoughtful, said, to make hope palpable to the people we support and to their families, so that they can feel something hopeful about their futures. So it makes me think that what I hope happens, not that I hope that I believe will necessarily, but that I hope for, is that people in our field, leaders, self-advocates, administrators, turn the beam of inquiry toward themselves, not outward, not blaming ODP or whoever, but what is going on in my life and in my organization? What am I doing to make hope palpable for the people we support? And Hope, we keep saying Hope, but Hope Dittmeyer, who you will hear from shortly, she's one of those people. She runs an organization that didn't say, we're going to change the state of Kentucky, which is where she's from. And there are another handful of organizations I know of around the country. What Hope Dittmeyer did was say, what am I going to do, and my organization is it going to do? Here's what we're going to do. We just drew a line in the sand. We're going to stop doing that and only do this. Right? And we don't have to change the state of Kentucky or the Administration of Community Living to do that. I can change Hope Dittmeyer. Hope Dittmeyer can change Hope Dittmeyer. I can change my organization and stop doing that. So I hope that I hope for more leaders like Hope Dittmeyer, who can develop the courage to do what needs to be done, to develop the humility to recognize that what we've been doing ain't so good, and the honesty to say that, and the courage to deal with the uncertainty, because as you move along that line of supporting people to move from clienthood to citizenry, the uncertainty goes up, right? You stick with your group home, you know the rules, right? You know where the money comes from, you know how you're going to get in trouble, you know how you're going to stay out of trouble. But as you start to do more citizen-oriented things for the people you support, the uncertainty goes way up. Not quite sure how I'm going to pay for this. Not quite sure how the regulators are going to respond to this. So what you need is a sense of courage to move in that direction. And I hope, I'll finish with this. I really enjoyed Jill Jacobs' talk, especially when she got down, told us her and her family's story. But I got a kick out of, I don't think she's still with us, so, but this focus on the rule, the settings rule. I hope that we don't get fooled by compliance with a rule. The rule is really aspirational. You know, it's giving people real lives. You can be in 1,000% compliance with that rule and not change one iota about what your organization does, right? Oh, I gave everybody a key, which is part of the rule. You have a key to your home. That doesn't mean it's your home, crying out loud. So I hope that we begin to move in a direction away from I comply with the rule to I am giving people the good life or the bestest life I know how to give people. So that's that on hope.
All right. Thanks so much, Christopher. Appreciate it. And I would love to turn the same question over to Hope. Good morning, Hope. Thank you for joining us. As we think about the future, we're curious as to what provides you hope for the future.
Well, just like the other two speakers here, I think there's a lot to be concerned about. There's a whole lot to be concerned about. But as a service provider at Mattingly Edge, we provide only individualized, customized supports based on getting to know the person and what they want their lives to look like. And so my hope comes from, if I can share a quick story of the work being done. So one of the men that we support, his name is Robin, and like many of the people we support, he came to our organization for support after living in congregated, segregated services. He lived in a building with about 15 other people, had done that his entire adult life. And he came to us because during COVID, he couldn't live with the rules of that institution. And he and his family asked if we could help create something different for him. And so over the course of a couple of years, his family purchased a condominium in a wonderful, wonderful neighborhood. And we built a team of direct support folks around him. So Robin, our job was to understand what Robin was looking for in support workers and to recruit and screen them. And then Robin and his family would interview and make decisions about hiring. And so he had a team of about 7, mostly men, 2 women, and I think 5 men, who helped cover around the clock care because he'd come from an institutional setting. Folks said he needed 24/7 care. So in Kentucky, when you in your plan of care each year, the team has to decide how many hours a day you're allowed to be alone or unsupported. And Robin's team had always said zero. He needed somebody 24 hours a day. So we started that with him. We helped him find this condominium. We helped him recruit a housemate who lives with him, so that someone's there in the overnight sleeping hours. And so that roommate is not an employee of ours. It's an agreement that he has with Robin to live there for free in exchange for being there overnight for security purposes. And other than that, for 16 hours a day, Robin had a team. Well, up comes the terrible workforce problem. And we were just, as we lost people on his team, we could not find replacements. And we were really, really struggling. And so we met with his family, as we did many, many families, and said, here's the data, here's the information. This is what's happening in the workforce crisis. Here's what we've done to try to address that. We raised pay. We did improved benefits, quickened our hiring process, did a number of things, but we were still having trouble. So we met with the family and said, what are we going to do about this so that Robin can stay safe in his home? And there were a couple suggestions and ideas that we pursued. One of them was to test whether Robin could really be alone part of the day or not. Right. And we use technology to do that. So Robin would have about an hour and 15 minutes of in between two support workers that he'd be on his own, but he had a device that he could contact somebody. And actually in the very first week, I believe he was even on camera with somebody, so that somebody wasn't physically present but was watching him. That worked really well. And over time, the team decided that Robin could in fact be alone up to 2 hours at a time by himself. Now, we're an organization that has always believed in independence, right? And autonomy and all those things. And yet this crisis is what took us to finally ask the question, is it really true that Robin has to have somebody attached to him at all times, right? So but that's hopeful, that the idea that people might be able to prove themselves and not be over supported. I believe in Kentucky, we have a lot of people who get no support and a lot of people who are over supported 24 hours a day. So that was a really good thing. The second question we ask is, who else could spend time with Robin? Right. And we did a meeting, we invited people in, we did a relationship map, and there was this uncle on the relationship map that I had heard Robin talk about forever. And he just retired. He retired last year. And we asked the question, would he be interested in coming to Robin's for dinner on Monday nights? That's one of the times that we don't have support. We reached out to his uncle. His uncle said, now I'm retired. I have the time to do it. I really haven't gotten to spend much time with Robin. And now he spends, I believe it's from 4 to 8 with Robin on Mondays. That's a great thing, right? Family pulling and attracting natural supports in as part of the solution. And then finally, we said, is there a way, when Robin goes out in community, he lives in a wonderful, walkable neighborhood, lots of things he can get to, restaurants, bars, grocery stores, pharmacies, so forth and so on. Could Robin access community by himself? He's a wheelchair user, but he drives his own wheelchair. And could he go to Kroger, his grocery store right there, where he goes 3-4 times a week? Everybody there knows Robin, right? What would happen if Robin went to Kroger by himself? And so we worked it out where a support worker was going to stay at a distance instead of being right with Robin, right? Going to be, 20 yards or more away with hands-off support. What happens? And you know what happened? People pulled stuff off the shelf for him. People put his groceries on the checkout lane, right? People did it. Citizens did it. And so my hope is that we'll get really creative, and that creativity will lead us to goals we already had before the crisis, central to our mission. And that is that people do as much for themselves as they can, because that increases autonomy and personal power and all kinds of things, less dependency. And that people rely on citizens for simple, everyday, common support, not personal care, but simple every day. People open the doors for us. People do, lady short in stature asks me to get something off, I'm 5'8", get something off of a top shelf, that we don't suffocate people with support services, but we find ways. And that's my hope, that instead of just applying support to people, that we use support to find ways that people will be less dependent on support, because they have more people, they have more power, they have more ability. So that's the thing I'm hopeful about. And that is, by the way, directed very specifically on, Chris's point, one person that our organization is supporting. It's not fixing the problem in the whole system, but I think is an example of how we can capitalize on this workforce crisis. We have to.
Thank you so much, Hope. Appreciate that response. I wanted to remind folks, if you have questions for our esteemed panel, to put those into the Q&A using the button on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. As we jump into our second question here, individuals with disabilities and their families want choices and self-determination in where they live, as well as how they utilize their public funding for home and community-based services. What's on the horizon that provides a wider range of choices? Again, what's on the horizon that provides a wider range of choices? And I'm going to start that question with Christopher. Christopher, any thoughts on that question?
So you're mixing up the order here, I see. Okay. Yeah, I do have some thoughts on it. Certainly one thing on the horizon is self-direction. Right? I know you do get some of that in Pennsylvania. We do it here in New York. And I'm a huge fan of self-direction. And it's fairly large here in New York. We have about 160,000 people enrolled in our waiver. And I think we're up to 27,000 of them have self-directed budgets. Just a caution again, what we're finding all over New York, and I'm guessing in other states, is that an awful lot of people are isolated. It's like we give them your budget, you're on your own, send us the bill. I don't know what you call them in Pennsylvania, but here the bill payers are called fiscal intermediaries. And we'll pay your bills, have a good life. So what we're hearing more and more is people feeling isolated. Yeah, I got my money. Yeah, I have this plan, but I'm all alone, and that's a big caution and worry. So while it's on the horizon, it's already here, right? The horizon is here. It's got some big question marks around it. The horizon, in my view, is the world is our horizon. If we can stop thinking about buildings and programs and services and start thinking about, I think Hope just referenced this, use the world as our service delivery model system. I was very disappointed earlier on in her opening remarks. Cindy Leonard said that we're closing, you guys are closing Polk, and there's some organization that's going to develop or build 4 group homes. Really? Really, we have doing this now. The world is out there, and you're going to develop 4 group homes, which will, and even Jill Jacobs alluded to it, group homes turn in on themselves. It's almost inevitable that they will do that. I like my thumbnail career is I spent 25 years developing group homes and 25 years taking them apart. The second half was a whole lot better and a whole lot more difficult, but to learn to use the world rather than the programs and services, get out of that human service language. I think another thing that's on the horizon is, we often ask, where's the money? I was struck by in the first video, the old institution director, they were talking about the cage, and the institution director said, what? I don't have enough money, I don't have enough staff, and the clinical people told me to do it. All right, go to some executive or CEO's office today and say, why are you doing that? And what will you hear? I don't have enough money. I don't have enough staff. And my clinicians are on board. When I was an administrator, I would think, I'm not poor. I got all of this money locked up in my bricks and mortar and group services. I already have the money. We can bankroll innovation if we can learn to free the money we've already got tied up in the bricks and mortar. How do we leverage the bricks and mortar money and the program money tied up in it into innovation? The money is here. You know, I learned a couple of years ago, Ireland, the country, sent its administration on with disability, I don't know what they call it, but they sent letters to their provider sector that said, in organization by organization, dear ARC, we've looked at your books and we see that you own X millions of euros worth of property, free and clear, that was paid for by the Irish government, probably by the people that live in those group homes, but with their benefits. If you want to do anything more in this sector with public money, show us how you're going to free the money up from the bricks and mortar. The Irish government had some chutzpah to do that, but they understood where the money was. Also on the horizon, I think, is one of the videos, the narrator said, we are evolving slowly in our thinking about who belongs. And as we continue to evolve to get to that point that we all belong, that's on the horizon. And what's key to that is, you know, we toss around this phrase, person-centered planning. And I don't know how you do it in New York or in Pennsylvania, but here in New York, the official form of persons, the one adopted by our state agency, is a digital thing. Key in, you know, they ask you the questions, you pop in the answers, and your life plan pops out. Don't be fooled by that, right? So I think, I'm hoping, this is back to the hope question as well as the horizon question, is that we learn or accept that person-centered planning is not a form. It's deep, deep listening. Again, to go to our friend John O'Brien, it's about developing relationship. And if you're just using a computer to tell you, here's your plan, that's not going to cut it. So I'm hoping that on the horizon, we learn that the plan that comes out of the computer is nothing more than something that tells you, here's how much money we'll give you. But that the real planning is in deep listening. And again, John and our other good friend, Beth Mount, people who created person-centered planning back in the early 80s, even then, they said, and they still say to this day, person-centered planning cannot be divorced from organizational change, right? You can't do authentic person-centered planning and learn this is what so-and-so's good life looks like, and then not tinker around with your organization. So I'm hoping that on the horizon, more and more leaders will learn I have to change my organization in order to facilitate who belongs.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful response, Christopher. Deputy Secretary, anything to add on the horizon that provides a wider range of choices? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'd just add, in Pennsylvania, we actually have pretty broad use of self-directed services. We've got a lot of different service types that people can self-direct, 2 different models they can use for the kind of fiscal intermediary. We have support brokers available to support people who need a little more assistance with self-direction. We have some work to do there in terms of expanding that, making sure there's true access to that service statewide. But the other thing, 2 things on the horizon that I think will really help with self-direction and affording more choices to people. One, we've got we intend to move to selective contracting for supports coordination. I won't get into all of the detail, but basically what we're going to do is change our agreement with the federal government that will essentially allow us some more room in terms of working with our supports coordination organizations to establish performance standards, not just compliance with rules. I know there's been a lot of discussion about rules and compliance. This would actually establish some quality standards that we would expect to see in supports coordination. We would also like to change the way we pay supports coordination so that we can really do some alignment with outcomes, that we can be looking at what is occurring in individuals' lives in terms of outcomes. We can look at broader system outcomes that we're looking to achieve and can actually pay for that in terms of supports coordination. We have set supports coordination is totally pivotal, right? These are the people that come out, they do the planning, they know the system, they're guiding and advising and facilitating these planning meetings, and should be doing it in a true person-centered way. The skill of that supports coordinator is really critical. And we have set supports coordination up in such a way that they are burdened phenomenally with a lot of administrative stuff that doesn't necessarily have a lot of value for the individual and the family. So we've got a lot of cleanup to do there, and we are embarking on that now. The other thing I would say is, and this actually came out of the closures of Polk and Whitehaven, there was in our fiscal code, our legislature passed some language that said the savings from those closures, which is pretty significant, just this year, it's a little over $10 million, must go. It goes into a restricted fund that must go to housing, waiting list, or direct support professional quality. Our advisory committee currently is exploring the idea of doing some kind of housing subsidy for individuals, not for residential settings. We already subsidize residential settings, group homes. The state already does that. This would be for people who are living in their own homes. And I think that has the potential to be a game changer if we can figure out how to do that and pull that off. And we've seen other states, we've got a couple of models here in PA that are pretty encouraging. So that's an area where I think if we can do that, that's going to be really significant change in terms of people's choices.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to ask Hope to respond. Hope, we are going to get to audience questions here next. Hope, anything to add on the horizon element?
Yes, very, very, in addition to what Kristen and Christopher have already said, I just think we have to be real with ourselves. We have to be honest. Like, person-centered planning in a congregate setting is an oxymoron. It doesn't work. So the model itself is broken. Mm-hmm. If living in someone else's home, being a guest in someone else's home or a tenant, dramatically limits not only your choices, but your autonomy. And so at Mattingly Edge, we believe very, very strongly in separation of housing and supports. Your landlord should not be your service provider. It doesn't make sense. The final rule tried to address some of that, like your landlord has to give you a key, right? Your landlord has to let you close your bedroom door. Your landlord has to, but you still have the landlord, and the landlord is your service provider. So I think on the horizon, the idea of housing, affordable, accessible housing, is the linchpin to all of this. Because if you live in your own home, the provider and the government does not have control how you function and operate in that home. And so we believe very strongly in the separation of housing. The other thing I would say is that there is a lot of money in the housing world that we have not worked to access. We started a project at Mattingly Edge. It's getting ready to spin off. I'm really proud of it as its own nonprofit that is called Inclusive Housing Solutions. And it works to help people, help increase the amount of affordable, accessible housing in Louisville. But until that is solved, so right now we are spending money that's in our pots for people to have housing when there's money other places when people need help with housing. So in Kentucky, one of the things we did, and Kentucky doesn't do very many things right at all, but this we got right. In our Olmstead plan, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities get top priority to Section 8 vouchers. So, yeah, it's part of the Olmstead plan. And so if you have an intellectual or developmental disability, you go apply for a Section 8 voucher. You get a letter from them saying, oh, you're number 5,620 on our waiting list. You take that letter to the Independent Living Center and you get a voucher. You can get a voucher anywhere from within 3 to 6 months time, which is the average waiting list here is over 5 years. So we can use that process to help people find housing, but because we had so much trouble finding housing, we had to kind of invent this initiative to work on that. So I think, the model's broken. People need to have their own homes because that's the only way they're going to really have choice about how they live.
Thank you so much, Hope. I do want to get to some of the attendee questions. So I'm going to toss out a question, and any of our panelists I welcome for your response. We do have a few, and I want to try to get to as many as we can in our very little time remaining. So the first question I want to respond to is ODP looking at ways to include more of a local voice as the system develops? Any thoughts or response to that from our panelists?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Certainly. So there are a couple of things. One, we have in the last number of years, I don't know, for people who aren't familiar with EA or deeply embedded in the knowledge of our system, one of the things that's important about understanding how ODP works is we actually administer all of our services through almost all of our services, not our institutional services are not administered this way, but the vast majority of our services are administered in partnership with local government, with our counties. We have 48 county joinders, so that covers the entire state, where we have agreements with them, and they actually administer services at the local level on our behalf. So we delegate about half of our responsibilities that we have to the federal government are actually delegated at the county level. And we have been doing quite a bit of work to strengthen those relationships because I think there was a lot of push and pull. Pennsylvania got in some trouble with the federal government for what they said. You have 67 different programs. And so we had to kind of make sure that we had more standardized operations. And I think we might have pulled that back a little bit too much. So we've been doing a lot of work to really strengthen the partnerships at the local levels. All of those counties should have, based on a 1966 law, advisory groups that are providing input to the county plan. Again, some of those real strong. We've got, very vocal advocates that participate in those. Others where, the voices of advocates aren't super active on those county boards. So certainly for anybody who is interested in getting involved, you can go to your county ID office and see if if the county board is meeting when it is, and if they have a seat available for you. But totally agree. I think particularly when we're talking about people who come to us who may need services over the course of a lifetime, depending, when they come to us in that lifespan. That local work is so important. We also have our family network and regional collaboratives that have been doing a lot of work around supporting families and using the life course framework, which I'm happy to put in the chat if people aren't familiar with it. That's another effort that we have really tried to put the locus of that at the local level, which is critical.
Thank you so much for that. We do have a lot of questions to get to. I'm going to apologize now. We're running out of time here. Going to try to squeeze in one or two more here. Really quick response, if anyone has one. What are the efforts that we're using to create, boost, and fund the next generation of change makers? Any initial thoughts on that question?
Well, a little bit. there are efforts that I know of around the country, and I hope you know of these too, of very progressive leaders, thought leaders, leading learning institutes is what we have called them of late, which really put people into a turn the beam of inquiry inward kind of setting. Like, what are you really thinking about the people you support? What are your assumptions? What is authentic person-centered planning, and are you really doing it? And what capacities do you need to develop to increase your ability to listen deeply to the people you support? So these are not focused on budgeting or governance or risk management. These learning institutes are focused heavily on personal development. And maybe if somebody wants information about them in your state or in other states, maybe you could send a note to Cindy, and Cindy could send it on to me, and I can get you the information.
Thanks so much, Christopher. So I do want to take a moment to thank all of our esteemed panelists for their time, their testimony. Really do appreciate it. I do recognize that we had some additional questions we weren't able to get to. We will work with Cindy and team to try to provide responses. We may explore possibly future events, bringing up some of those questions as well. So thank you very much to Deputy Secretary Hope and Christopher for your feedback and your thoughtful responses. Before I turn it back over to Cindy, I do want to make sure I acknowledge all the amazing folks behind the scenes that have made today's event possible. We've got a great tech team on board. Thank you to both of our sign language interpreters for their support for today. And as I turn it back over to Cindy, I do want to thank Cindy for your leadership and your work to make this special event happen. So thank you very much, everyone. And Cindy, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Chaz. Well, everyone, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us and hanging in there. And thank you again to Commissioner Jacobs, Chaz, Deputy Secretary Ahrens, Hope, Chris, Sierra, our partners at Heinz History Center, Temple Institute on Disabilities, and Achieva. And once again, we're grateful to A.W. Mellon Foundation for their role in making this event possible. And a second thank you to our wonderful ASL interpreters, Neve and Erica. And our apologies to everyone for the initial glitch that we had with the ASL interpreter's video not showing up on the screen. I'd also like to mention, on a related note, there's a newly published book. I just finished reading this. It's related to the history of institutions in America, and it's called Public Hostage, Public Ransom, Ending Institutional America. The book is by William Bronston, MD, who was a physician practicing at Willowbrook State Hospital, or State School rather, in Staten Island, New York in the 70s. In addition to the history and the conditions he battled during his work there, he relays his journey in catalyzing a federal class action lawsuit against the state of New York to close that institution. It's a really powerful and compelling book, like you can't put it down kind of reading. I am going to drop a link to the book website in the chat for anyone who's interested. I'll put it in the follow-up email as well. It's www.publichostagepublicransom.org. There's that in the chat. And finally, we urge you to get to know the consortium. Our website, which is wpdhac.org, which is our acronym letters. I'll drop that in the chat as well. Is a central resource for the disability history of Western Pennsylvania. And when you visit, be sure to go down to the footer and sign up for our e-newsletter. We're going to be launching a special program in the coming month so that you can join us and become a part of our work and support our work more directly. Thank you again to everybody involved today and to our wonderful audience for being here. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.